As we keep telling you guys, we're going to bring on amazing guests, and this episode is one of those episodes where we have brought on one of the best.
Saw your business. I know you're in the area. I would love for you to be in a room with like-minded professionals so you have a safe place to share and ask questions and just learn organically with them.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Pharmacists go to do like informational meetings. They just, hey, I'm talking about this drug, blah, 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 blah. They just run through the whole thing and they're like, okay, do you have any questions?
Okay, I got two final questions. So one is,
Like, what just happened?
Yeah.
That's what you're thinking, right?
What
welcome to the Money Medicine Podcast, where today we're going to be discussing strategies to grow your healthcare business, tools to accelerate that growth, and how top practices and pharmacies are executing and winning. All right, we are back with podcast episode number 17. And as we keep telling you guys, we're going to bring on amazing guests. And this episode is one of those episodes where we have brought on one of the best. Today we are joined by Logan, as always, Logan Morse from Keystone Compounding Pharmacy. But also we have today Tony Wally from Orthomolecular, and Tony's going to shed a light on a number of different subjects. So super excited to have her on the podcast. So first and foremost, appreciate you carving out some time, Tony.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Cool. So for those of you that don't know, Tony has worked for Orthomolecular for 12 years, Orthomolecular products, I guess, per se. Very well known in the supplement space. A lot of you probably carry their products and maybe even have a rep that's been trained by Tony. Tony is a field trainer for Orthomolecular, and she also has one of the largest functional form events in the entire country. So if your market, your territory has ever heard about that, you might have a rep in your area running one of those. Tony's got one of the biggest and one of the pioneers in that endeavor. So she can shed light on a lot of things and clearly has the ability to get a lot of people in one place for an event. So we're gonna pick her brain as best we can to find out all the knowledge and expertise, because she does cover a territory. So if you're not in that territory, you can't control that, but you don't have the opportunity to interact with her. But on this episode of the podcast, you'll be able to. So, Tony, I guess we'll kind of kick it off in two different subjects, but we'll start with one, which is kind of on the doctor detailing side and kind of rolling right into your functional forum. So the functional forum, obviously provide the feedback here. We're filling the blanks, but that is an event where you essentially get together a ton of providers, a ton of experts, and bring everyone together with the goal of continuing their education and kind of giving them insights into things that they could be doing, things that they could be doing better. Like, what does that all look like?
Yeah, so my forum's called the Indianapolis Integrative Forum. It's very much so a passion project of mine. I realized when I first came into the field that I had the unique opportunity to know so many amazing providers, but they didn't necessarily know each other. And so I really had a great vision of wanting to kind of be a connector in my community. So my goal always was to try to stand out from my competition. And this was a nice way for me to really genuinely not just tell, but show providers like, hey, I'm invested in you, your business outside of just selling supplements. And these communities are so amazing because I host 3 to 4 events a year. So it allows them as providers to network with one another. Maybe they want to shadow another provider. It also allows them to get ongoing education that's affordable. I would say, especially for new providers that don't necessarily have the means to pay for like an entire IFM or A4M fellowship. So it's something I think that providers definitely look forward to, and I host them routinely. So,
yeah, that's amazing. So it sounds like you've taken the approach of value first, right? With a lot of your providers and relationships is, how do I provide value? And you saw this, would it be safe to say, this event, this forum, as a way to, again, just further provide value and just, kind of separate yourself from your competition, to be fair? To be clear. So kind of on that topic of value, when did you start your functional forum event? Because you've been at Ortho for 12 years. So how long have you been running that?
So I believe I started, the first meeting I ever had was, I think, in 2015. So probably about 8 years ago. It started very small and intimate. I used to just host them actually at restaurants, and I would very strategically pick 3 providers that I know didn't know one another, and I would kind of bring them together. But it just organically grew into this large thing. But I've been doing it close to probably about 8 years.
Now, how important, looking back when you probably started it in 2015, you probably couldn't see a direct ROI. Maybe
Right.
you could right away, maybe you couldn't. But I'm sure now it's probably been a big accelerant or kind of moat, if you will, that's kind of protected maybe providers looking alternatively, because it's like, man, I love Tony. I love her product. She gives me so much value. I mean, kind of on that, what does it look like now doing it consistently for 7, 8 years? Like, how valuable do you feel like it's been for you in terms of developing relationships, keeping relationships? Because you're kind of your own little business in a way. So I think like pharmacies
Yeah.
could probably relate to this, or practices could relate to this. If I can do something consistently enough, build relationships, and just continue to show up, that I might not see it in the first year, but 5, 6, 7, 8 years down the road, it's obviously, in your words, I guess, how helpful has it been?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny when I do my ride-alongs with reps when I'm training them, they can attest to this. But normally for me now, the value that I see is often when I cold call on somebody, people know me now for running that forum. So I would say probably 90% of the time when I meet new providers, I will cold call and get in the door using that forum. As opposed to just kind of going in as a rep, I kind of say, hey, you know what? I saw your business. I know you're in the area. I would love for you to be in a room with like-minded professionals so you have a safe place to share and ask questions and just learn organically with them. And it's really helped me sustain business. And to your point, I didn't necessarily even envision that. I have to be honest, I started the forum because I was filling the shoes of who is now the vice president of ortho. So I knew very quickly getting into the field that I had to do something to make myself stand out, not just from the competition of other supplement companies, but also from being compared to him. And I knew that my unique skill set was bringing people together and doing that. And so that's kind of where it started from. But I would say that over the 12 years I've been here, I have the largest territory for ortho. And I believe a massive part of that is because of my forum.
Yeah. Now, to be clear, because I know this background, but some of the audience might. When you say you have the largest territory, you're talking sales. You're not talking geographics.
Oh, no. So I have, I think, the smallest geography. When I started with ortho, I actually covered almost 2 states. I covered Indiana, Kentucky. I've been split. It's 3 or 4 times. So I just cover the 317 area code.
Oh, wow.
But that has the largest sales volume in the country.
Yeah. So imagine if we even compared like, zip code to zip code. I'm sure the percentage difference between you and like the second place zip code would be astonishing.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of regions, I would say, and I would say partially, I think, because there are more reps that are more invested in these forums. So I think people are growing more quickly. But it's just always funny to me because you don't necessarily think of like Indiana as like the poster child for health and fitness. But the greater Indianapolis area is a great hub for integrative medicine. There's no shortage of integrative providers here. But a part of that is because we do have, and we're so blessed with a community of providers that are also willing to help other providers. And I think sometimes you don't necessarily see that in every community. And I think we just have an awesome group of practitioners here locally.
Yeah, that's amazing. I heard a phrase that actually last week. It was, again, this is nothing transformative per se, and I'm not going to get the exact quote, but it was really just talking about how consistency compounds, right? And so I know we're talking about the context of, this functional form, but I think there's overlap between, businesses,
Sure.
pharmacies doing outreach and, trying to create relationships with providers. But how hard was it for you to promote and get 5 people in an event in 2015 versus getting like an additional 5 people to show up in 2023, right? Like, how much easier for you is it to get people because you've been consistent versus when you're starting out, there was unknowns with the event, people didn't have that relationship with you. I guess you really, to me, feel like, your superpower might just be your consistency, to like not change, to show up, to continue to do these events. And I think that's also, again, I wish more businesses were consistent, but I guess kind of talk about that and what it was like in the beginning to try to develop this event.
Yeah, it's funny. So sales was not like my immediate vision that I saw myself in. I was going a different route, but I grew up in a household with people that sold. Both of my parents sold insurance for a long time. So I saw two different types of approaches to sales. My dad was very much so like the gregarious life of the party. People were just attracted to his personality. And my mom was more of the timid person, but she was very reliable and she was trustworthy. And so I knew that I wanted to kind of uniquely bring both of those things together. When I started this forum, I think it was very difficult for me to fill a room. But I do think because I had immediately came in the field and did probably to me the most simple part of sales, which is just doing what you say you're going to do. It was very much so, not as much as a challenge, I guess, is what I thought it was going to be, because I think I had built such a strong foundation with people that when I asked them to come support my forum, they showed up because they knew that I supported them in their business. But now I think with the help of social media and stuff that I wasn't necessarily utilizing when I started it, it's grown, I think, also that way, because I'm also pretty consistent with using other avenues to market these events as well.
Yeah, for sure. So as a field trainer, you come in with all this experience. So for you to go drum up business, it looks a lot different for, someone that just came out of inside sales and getting plopped into a new territory.
Right.
What are some of the biggest things that you're trying to ingrain, that you're trying to coach them on, that you're trying to, kind of maybe remove even some bad habits? Like, what are the biggest obstacles in the beginning? Because again, Logan, as a pharmacist, they're doing doctor detailing. People that listen are doing doctor detailing. They might be inserting someone. They might be doing it for the first times itself. Like, what's the hardest part for new reps or new people, I guess in their sales outreach?
Yeah, I don't know. I always try to remind people when they're with me is like where you start is not as important as where you finish. I think just really doing the little things every day, showing up on time, looking the part, checking the boxes of little things that you can do every day, because there's going to be a gap of having to learn products and all these things. That stuff's not going to come overnight. That's going to be repetitive and something you're going to learn over, a long period of time. But back towards kind of like the just doing what you say you're going to do, the foundation or fundamental skills of sales, I try to really ingrain in people that like you are, as important as your word is to somebody. So if you tell somebody you're going to follow up, do it, put it in your calendar, take notes, ask questions. I think we live in like a society now where people want to feel like they're experts in everything and they don't feel like there's a safe place to ask questions. Mm-hmm. And I always encourage people, like, I love being a mentor. Ortho was so small when I started, I didn't necessarily have that myself. So I try as hard as possible to encourage them to do those things, because sales is hard. It's a challenge. I was a chemist for many years and I had a very monotonous career, but my job ended when I left that day. With sales, there's always projects going on. I think you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that's kind of what I encourage people. I'm like, hey, I've been doing this almost 12 years and I still have lots of questions and I still don't know a lot of things. And I'm not afraid to say that I don't know something. Fortunately for me, I know a lot of smart people that I can ask questions to and I'll get somebody to answer. But I think just the honesty and purity of that really goes a long way with people. So
yeah,
I don't know if that answers your question, but that's my answer.
I think that's really well said. So would it be safe to say then, it's not just product knowledge that's like the difference between a great rep and not as, maybe a struggling, rep? Like, what do you see those differences are? It sounds like on your end, it's a lot of, being consistent and staying true to your word and following up and like genuinely caring about the provider. I'm sure you've seen some people that don't have those maybe personal skills, but have a lot of product knowledge that don't work out. Right?
Yeah.
In your years at Ortho?
So ortho has a tendency to kind of, I think, sometimes put people in categories like you're either a science person and you have that background, or you are a salesperson and you have that background. I don't really think I had either, because my science background, that's a broad term. You know, I mean, I didn't have
Yeah.
any experience in nutraceuticals, and I absolutely didn't have sales experience. But I feel like to be successful, at least with, you know, the career that I have, I think you have to constantly be a student of your own profession. Like I have to a T, if you look at like my office day on my calendar, I literally will schedule out, I'm studying for an hour, this hour I'm, you know, harvesting leads, this hour. Like I think you just really have to get in a routine that makes sense for you, because I think all of these skills are very easily learned. I just think sometimes people are not committed to the cause. It's kind of
Yeah.
the problem.
No, I think that's well said. I saw a video that said something to the effect of it takes people, 20 hours to learn a skill that would take them, or not 20
Right.
hours. It takes them 20 years to learn a skill that could take them 20 hours of work. They just take 19 years and 364 days to finally start to, act on it and learn. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, yeah, it's funny that you said that. I love how diligent your calendar is. That's something I'm always trying to work on, for sure.
Which is funny because at Ortho they talk a lot about science, and you need to know that. Like knowledge is power, but to me, character is what gives you respect.
Yeah.
And so you can know a lot of stuff, but I think you have to know the time and place in a meeting to appropriately kind of show your knowledge, because you don't want to ever come across as somebody that appears like you want to be the smartest person in the room. And I think sometimes people get very caught up in wanting to regurgitate information, and they don't ask enough questions. They're not coming from a place of service. You should be showing up in a meeting asking, what it is that somebody needs, so you can kind of meet them where they're at, not just kind of giving them information on a product because it's on promotion for that quarter. But
Yeah.
I think that's so important what you just said there. So many times when pharmacists go to do like informational meetings, they just, hey, I'm talking about this drug, blah, 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 blah. They just run through the whole thing and they're like, okay, do you have any questions? And then it's just like, what did you really do for that provider? You didn't find out, hey, like, are you having issues with, psoriasis patients, or like, tell me
right.
about a complex patient that you're having. And then saying, oh, well, by the way, I've got maybe a solution for you. Now you can probably talk about something in the meantime, but so many times it's just regurgitating information, and then they're just like, all right, see ya, bye. And you're just
Like what just happened?
yeah.
That's what you're thinking, right?
One of the things that, my dad always taught me was he who speaks most loses. And so a lot of times it's actually listening to their concerns that I think really helps out. And so pharmacists do a horrible job at doctor detailing. I actually was in an office yesterday, and that was one of my biggest takeaways is like, and maybe maybe I'd love to hear your side of this. You have a meeting with a provider. When you finish up, do you write maybe some notes of like, hey, this is what I did well, or here's where I think I could have improved, or things of that nature? Because I feel like I left that meeting, I was like, I shouldn't have said this, and I should have done this. I'd love to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so we have in like our CRM that we take notes in, there's always like a post-call follow-up where we're reviewing kind of the call, so to speak, and realizing what we did or did not do well. I absolutely do that. I'm fortunate too. My husband, who is a police officer, has really changed the way that I operate in meetings. I will say he was a hostage negotiator for many years. And so he always reminds me too of the importance of building rapport and asking questions is, one, to uncover needs. But the other piece of that is you always want to make sure that the person speaking to you genuinely feels like they're the one that's in charge, because they should be, right? I mean, you're asking for them to buy into you. And I think sometimes that's kind of like a missed piece of communication, because I think at the end of the day, no matter how different we all are, the two commonalities that we all have is we all want to feel valued and we all want to feel heard. And it's just a great book actually that changed my life in sales is a book by Chris Voss. It's actually a retired, have you read that before?
Oh, yes.
Never Split the Difference?
Never Split the Difference. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that book, mostly because my husband was a hostage negotiator and it was just an interesting aspect. But like the Black Swan or all these concepts that they go over, it's just, I think for somebody that like me that doesn't have a background in sales, that's just such a cool perspective and way to look at engaging with people. But
Yeah. No. Well, I think what jumps out, and I hope the people listening, kind of catch this too, is like how much work goes into being good. Like we've barely scratched the surface, but I think you've already heard Tony mention like, the time she spends on her off days and how she, continues to sharpen her axe, if she will, making sure that things stay up to date in CRM, making sure that you're doing proper follow up, making sure that you're listening. Like there's a lot that goes into being great at sales and getting someone's trust and ultimately getting them to want to work with your business or work with you as an individual. But I think everyone wants to just, go and have their first 2 meetings and see business, start coming their way. And that's just not the reality.
it's not. You have to be like committed. I was just actually talking to my husband last night. I was looking at my just pivot reports for some of my customers. And it's funny to me because my second largest customer is somebody that I cold called on for 7 years. And now she's one of my largest customers. And I think sometimes people lose sight of certain things and realize that everybody's needs are a little bit different. So like in the beginning of the year, something that I do, and I always laugh because my manager that looks at my calendar is probably like, he thinks they're probably the most random notes that I write down, but I always do certain things every year. So in the beginning of the year, I'll write everybody an email, mostly to like my top 30 or 50 accounts. And I'm like, hey, I'm a big expectations person. What are your expectations for me this year? Because some people are transactional people and they just want you in there to do product reviews, new things every 6 to 8 weeks. And you can do that same song and dance all the time. And that's good. But a lot of people are looking for different experiences, whether that's they're growing their IV room and they want you in there to help develop protocols. Maybe they're growing their staff and they need you in there more for staff training. Maybe they want some guidance or connections that you have, to help build another aspect of their business. And so I try to figure out in the beginning of the year, like, how often do you want me in there? What exactly is it that you want from me this year? Because that may be vastly different from what you wanted from me last year. And just really making sure that you're properly communicating with people, not just communicating to communicate.
Yeah. I love that. To start the year because it's so true. Like the needs of a business year to year change. It's very easy to just assume that their needs are what they were last year. And if you don't have those check-ins and have those conversations, you won't know if, kind of they've shift focus or, things look a little bit different. So that's really, really interesting. So it's funny that you mentioned these biggest account being someone that you called on for 7 years. Cause I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Logan, Thomas highlighted, kind of an account that he had to really follow up on for a long time. That I don't know if it's one of his biggest accounts yet, but it sounded like it was fruitful if I'm remembering correctly. What is the big difference that you see going after bigger accounts versus smaller accounts, and kind of how do you as a trainer look at a new hire, a new field rep, and coaching them through looking at their territory and seeing these big opportunities? Like, do you have them start to go after those larger opportunities in the beginning? Do you start them off with smaller ones? Like, how do you help them build up to be ready for those larger opportunities?
I would tell somebody everything's trial and error. I mean, I would call on the big people immediately. My goal for every year is to always find at least 2 to 3 like A-level accounts. My goal by the end of the year is to make them like me, to figure out what it is that I need to do to service them in the capacity that they need. But yeah, I mean, of course, you have to isolate the big fish in your area. You obviously want to constantly get new business and also equally sustain and grow the business that you have. But I mean, with those larger accounts that exist in your territory that aren't doing business, I mean, obviously, I think I heard Thomas talk, and I would attest to the fact that you don't want to be in there too much to be annoying, but you can easily find ways. And for me, my forum definitely helps me with that because I absolutely have reasons to go in there all the time to personally invite them to events. I mean, I have other reasons outside of just leading with products to gain that. And so I always encourage people that are writing with me, find your unique talent, figure out what that is. I mean, for pharmacists, my accounts that are here locally, I'm always like, do something that's like outside of the box. Have you ever met with like an account and says, you know what, after hours, I would love to bring you in just to give you a tour of my pharmacy? Like, just so you can see what I'm doing that makes me a
Mm-hmm.
little bit different, to get them outside of their office, but for you to like develop roots, of your relationship with them. And so I encourage people to really think outside of the traditional ways that you can kind of build rapport with leads or cold calls or things like that. But
Yeah. Well, I think when you talk about, follow up, it's very different to have value based follow up versus follow up, right? Like for some people, when they hear follow up, it's, hey, I'd like to circle back on our conversation from 2 weeks ago. You hear like the circle back, or like, hey, just touching base, or like, have you had a chance to, like, those can be those can quickly become quite annoying. Right. And
right.
I'm sure you've had your inbox filled with that kind of stuff. I've had my inbox filled with that kind of stuff. But if I got an email every day, every hour from Warren Buffett with like a business advice, I would not care. Right. Because there's a gain, there's some benefit to me.
Right.
And so I think you've clearly built a tool belt, and you probably build it somewhat in your office hours when you're doing this research and finding out new information, where it makes it easy for you to reach back out to these accounts, because it's not just, hey, I've got a new product to show you. It's, hey, I found this article that's really helpful, like wanted to pass it your way, or, I heard this from another provider, or I have an upcoming event. Like, you can always almost give them something in the process of, bringing up a conversation that might lead to them wanting to, add additional products or things like that.
Yeah. And then even with cold calls too, actually Emily, which I think is your rep,
Right.
right, Logan? Probably like 6 or 7 years ago, she said something that I thought was like, oh my God, that's like a genius idea. I'm mad I didn't think of it myself. But like, I very much so, because of the insight she gave me, I also go into like cold calls thinking of it almost like an interview, because it is. They don't know me. I don't know much about them other than what I researched on their website. And so she had suggested getting a short little list of testimonials and dropping that off when you cold call. Because my community is so large here too, this is such an intimate connection. More often than not, they're going to know somebody on that list. But it's also kind of a unique way too, just to add value and kind of a stamp of approval on you and what services you can offer them, that kind of thing. And I love when she told me to do that. And I always leave that behind in cold calls that when I don't know somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
That's smart. Yeah, I think there's a nugget in there for a pharmacy or two, for sure. So kind of shifting gears here, because I don't want it to just all be about doctor detailing, because I know,
Yep.
people listening, as one of the largest accounts, you only do that if your accounts are successful. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that would love to sell some more products, sell some more supplements at their practices, at their pharmacies. So, as you take a look at your accounts, you kind of already mentioned you've got some A players, you've got some A accounts, and you have some, I won't even assign D or E or, F to any other accounts. Let's just say the base is C. It doesn't get worse. You've got no bad accounts. They're all great to you. But what are the biggest differences that you see between your A players and your Cs? Like, what are they willing to do that the Cs won't do? Like, what are those massive gaps that like you probably sniff out pretty quickly?
Yeah, I would say one, there are people that have absolutely invested in their staff, and realizing that they are only going to be successful if their entire staff is on the same page. So if somebody tells me, hey, I want you in here because I want all my NPs or whatever to know, whatever, if it's a new product, I would say that, making sure that or me noticing that they're doing staff trainings. Two, social media. Usually my most successful businesses are people that have cohesive marketing with what they're trying to obviously do in their clinic, and then what they're displaying online. And, any of those kind of drip ads or things like that they're utilizing. Another thing often that I see too are people that aren't scared to do unique things to stand out. I mean, some of my most successful offices are the ones that were like the first to offer ozone therapy here locally, or the first to maybe do some type of training academy for other DOs in the area, or whatever it is. It's always people, again, that are constantly students of their own profession and trying to find unique ways to stand out. Because like in Carmel, Indiana, I could drive down Meridian Street and there's probably 100 providers that are very close, but you pick out and pluck out some of those offices. The most successful ones are people that are marketing their unique services and what they do very efficiently, that some others don't. But
Yeah.
I would say there are a few things.
So when you talk about, supplement sales, and you talk about, we'll just kind of put it in product sales. Um, how much feedback do you get from your top accounts and kind of what do they say, the difference that those product sales make on their bottom line, their ability to survive, thrive as a business, right? Because I think anyone would sign up for an extra $50,000, $100,000 a month in supplement sales. I think every business would love to have that. But very few get to that point. Very few do the activities to ultimately see those results. But for those that do get to those types of numbers and beyond, I mean, how vital do they kind of say that aspect of their business, that revenue is for their future, their longevity, everything?
I mean, huge. I mean, obviously for my lower accounts, it can vary from 5 to 10% of their overall profit up to 40% of their business. I would say as an account executive, something that I always notice, there's a certain threshold, which obviously I won't necessarily share on here, but when I see accounts reach a certain level, that's when I also will do my due diligence on staying on top of things that I can see to say, hey, you've reached a certain point. I see that you're a little bit stagnant. You're a great account, but how can we get you from point A to point B? Usually that's when you'll start having conversations about branding, private labeling, certain accounts like that, being able to have e-commerce and utilize, different avenues of things. But I mean, it's a massive part of their business. I mean, if their supplement sales are down, their total profit for their company is also not thriving as well. I mean, they see that immediately.
Yeah. Well, I think the funny thing about supplements that I don't know if people don't fully grasp it or it just doesn't seem to, I don't hear it as much as I thought it would, but like if I come and see Tony and Tony's my, provider and Tony helps me feel better. And in the process of making me feel better, like Tony gave me some supplements. Like I might not need to go back to Tony, for the services side. But if there's an easy way for me to continue to buy supplements, or there were supplements as a part of that process, I can continue to be a customer or a patient for Tony and, drive revenue. But if I only came to you for services and then you helped me feel better, which is awesome, you did your job, there's no other way for me to continue to transact with you. And likely I'm going to find supplements and I'm going to find some solutions elsewhere that very easily could have been your business, but they're not. And I think so many miss out on that increase in the lifetime value of their patients because they don't bolt on that side.
Well, and that's why private labeling is, to me, in today's world, imperative for especially practices that are larger. Because when I started with ortho almost 12 years ago, the things that are existing now weren't even problems. I mean, now you're seeing, companies open up their entire catalog on Amazon and all these things, and you have providers who are doing extra labs, really invested on making precise treatment protocols, and they'll get the initial sale, but everybody in sales knows that's the easiest sale you can get, right? It's your second, third, fourth, fifth bottle, and a lot of those people then stray to other places. With private labeling, it keeps everything in-house. It also sends a very cohesive message to everybody, like, hey, this is a brand, I put my stamp of approval on it. This is something that I know, is an efficacious product that's regulated. I mean, there are just so many benefits to private labeling, but also for the safety of patients. You think of a clinic, like, some of my largest clinics are treating people that have Lyme disease and all of these chronic illnesses. Like, a provider really needs to know what they're on. And you have people shopping for supplements on these third-party websites, and it's not good. And even if it's legitimate product, you still don't want patients self-diagnosing and taking things that you're not aware of what they're taking. So I could talk about that all day long, though, because it irritates me.
Yeah, well, you bring up a good point, which is, from a provider standpoint, pharmacists, et cetera, like if you're baking a cake and all the ingredients and the ingredients are in front of you, you can probably more consistently bake that cake, right? But when you're seeing patients and your patient base is taking 30 different fish oils because, some buy from Walmart and some buy from Costco and some buy from all these different places, 5 to 10 of them could be decent. 20 of them could be terrible, but the problem is the variance. So then it makes you a little bit more gun shy, maybe as a provider or as a pharmacist, because you have less conviction because you're getting all this scattered feedback and you don't know if it's vitamin D and like that's the problem, or fish oil and that's the problem, or if it's just the products themselves. But when you remove some of that variance, you probably get more consistent feedback. You can make kind of more adjustments, I guess, to their treatment or, kind of their plan, if you will. But again, I think you bring up so many important points there, but that one just jumps out to me. Like, for just the simplicity standpoint, try to get your patients buying the same stuff.
Well, that's the thing too. Like, you think from a patient's perspective, like the experience of seeing a provider. If I'm a patient, I'm walking into a provider's office that doesn't private label, and I see a little bit of ortho, there's a little bit of whatever, Designs for Health, Metagenics, all these different brands. As a patient, if you see certain brands then on Amazon, and you in your mind as a patient think like, hey, the provider I'm going to supports this business, you know what I mean? Like, there's no harm in me getting it from here. I think there is just such a disconnect because an average patient doesn't sit there and think, you know what, I probably should be investing in the business that I'm relying on for healthcare. They don't think that. They're like, hey, this is a reputable brand. The provider trusts it, so I can get it here. Like, there are just so many gray areas with all of that, I think. But
I think that's
for sure.
That's a great
point. Go ahead, Lynn.
I was gonna say part of what I see happen a lot is, and this is the way I explain it to my patients, is when you start changing the variables and the protocols, you're gonna start changing the outcomes. And so, I want to make sure that what I use is going to actually fix you, and this is what is actually going to help. Versus, hey, I went to Meijer, I went to Walmart, I went to wherever, and I'm going to get my magnesium or my fish oil there, and I'm just like, you can do that if you want to, but don't come back to me. And I'm very honest with it. Don't come back to me and say, hey, I didn't help you, because you changed the variables and now the outcomes are going to be changed. So I think that's really, really important that you hit on that.
It's 100% true.
Well, I think you can say that to the patients, like you said. Like, we talk a lot about in marketing, and kind of objectives or kind of goals or outcomes that we're trying to hit for clients. Like, if I can control the variables and our team can control the variables, I feel really confident about the outcomes that we can deliver. But if it's, hey, we're going to drive people to your business, drive people to your pharmacy, and then, I don't know if Karen, Susie, Jake, Bob are going to be working the front desk, and one of them is having a bad day, or what if one of the lights, down over your supplement section? Like, there's so many variables to driving supplement sales that I can't control. But if it's all online, like, that's much easier for me to have conviction around the outcome that I can deliver. And so I think like supplements are no different on that front.
Right.
So it just made me think of that. So you've kind of brought up the you brought up there the element of private label, and you talked a little bit about how some people could potentially buy that product online if they're not private labeling, right? And you talked about how it's the thought process doesn't go through the patient's mind of, oh, I should go back to the business where I bought this. But I think the point that is, and you talked about private label obviously as being a reason, but if they can't buy it from your business easily, they might want to support you. And there's plenty of people I'd love to support. But if I have to, right? But if you don't make it convenient, it's at some point it's just not worth it, And there's plenty of people I'll bend over backwards for, and like, whatever. But there's certain times where it's like, especially in Indianapolis, you guys get snow. Like, I might want to go to the doctor's office, but you might get 2 feet of snow and you just can't get out of your house for a day or two, or it's just icy roads. And so I think as businesses, Tony kind of highlighted there, like, ultimately you want to make things more convenient. You want to make things easier for your patients to do business with you. And I think you've already highlighted some of the ways that can obviously happen. So, so transitioning there on that process, because you have a really tight area. We hear this a little bit, but I don't think anyone has as tight of a region as you with so much density. How do you handle the feedback of people saying, other people in the area private label with you, other people in the area carry your products, they're right down the street. Like, how am I going to stand out? Like, how do you deal with the demand concern, if you will, of like, we all have the same product?
Yeah, you know what? I honestly, there's not a shortage of patients. I mean, the reality is I have so many accounts that are so close in proximity but all of them are successful. So obviously the fact of the matter is, I think a lot of that competition is just in somebody's head, and it may not be a reality, because I really just don't think that there is a shortage of patients. I would say, especially in the last 3 years, to your point, people go to many different places to get supplements. So sometimes they're walking in a compounding pharmacy, you know what I mean, because it's close to them. They know you sell supplements, they're going to get them in there. Sometimes they go back to their doctor's office. Like, I think the love is kind of shared with everybody. Obviously, when you private label, I think it does offer you a unique ability to market and to reach a broader audience, which is why when I see accounts reach a certain level, I'm like, hey, this is logically the next step that you're going to want to take, because your brand, it's like free marketing. You know, your bottle is sitting on your shelf. You have your son's birthday party. Everybody's not seeing Orthomolecular now. They're seeing Logan's Pharmacy or whatever it is. Like, these are things that people, you know, can do to help reach or take their business to the next level. But honestly, I mean, there is no shortage of patients. That would be my answer, because there isn't.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect answer. My response has always been, if you were the only business in town, could you handle all the patient demand that there is? And if the answer is no, then shut up.
Right.
Like, you couldn't handle all the business. Even
that,
I say that part. That's just in the back of my head. But like, no one can, like, we can't service all the business. Like, if every, you know, healthcare company wanted to work with us, like, we couldn't, you know. And same thing with supplements. You're not going to handle the entire supplement market. So great answer. Great answer. So, one thing I'd love to kind of get feedback on is, you know, for you, you've been doing this for so long that you've seen different cycles, and cycles in the market, in the sense of times when people were probably pretty flush with cash, times when people were obviously heavily influenced to want to protect their health and protect their bodies, a la during COVID, those, you know, types of time periods. What does the supplement market kind of look like on your end in the last like 3 to 6 months or the last 12 months, as we've kind of transitioned out of COVID? Maybe the fear or the like hypersensitivity around health has maybe come down a little bit. Maybe it hasn't. Again, I want your experience, but how have things kind of changed in the last 12 months in your experience with the accounts that you manage?
Yeah, I would say so. We obviously saw a huge growth in supplement sales, obviously in the height of the pandemic and things that were going on. But now that we're kind of like on the down end of that hill that we climbed with that, the last 12 months has been significantly different. But what's interesting to me when I look at my accounts is that that's not really the case for everyone. And I think that the businesses that are actually still growing at a pretty steady and consistent rate are normally those that are private labeling, are those that are normally on social media marketing themselves. They have been able to like stand the test of time. But as a whole, I mean, the supplement industry, just with regulations, a lot of different things that have happened. I mean, this year has been a little bit spotty, I would say, for everyone. But there's definitely been a difference. But it's hard too, right? Because you have such an abnormal curve. You're comparing it to supplement sales that went from this to this. And even though we're back down here, if you would have had a normal curve, you're actually
still up. Or I would assume that would have been the case. Something I'm fascinated to see kind of play out is kind of the relationship between things like GLP-1s and supplements, and how that has an influence on supplement sales. Because, and again, I don't know what you're seeing on your end between the two of you, but, you know, there was a recent, I think, article and statement even on behalf of Walmart where they cited sales being lower because of GLP-1s and people ultimately eating less, right? So does that influence more people to want to ultimately buy supplements because they're getting, you know, they're losing some weight, and so they're looking at other avenues to kind of refine their health? Or are they saying, hey, this one-stop solution makes me not, you know, kind of take anything else? Have you heard anything? Have you seen anything? Have you felt anything?
Yeah, I mean, we have definitely seen growth with supplements that correspond to that medication, because like any medication that serves a purpose, it always is going to come with some type of side effect. So obviously things with motility and things like that, protective things that you can take for people that are shedding weight so fast, and things that you can take to support your liver and stuff like that. We've seen a rise in sales with definitely with products that correspond to that medication. We've also seen a pretty consistent still flow with even some of the weight loss things that we have, because at the end of the day with that medication, eventually people get off of it. So how do you sustain weight loss is the question. And obviously we can help kind of bridge that gap for patients. And this year in particular, we've come out with particular products that help with that. But I mean, for sure, there was a rise in several products because of that. I wouldn't say it hindered our sales any. I would say it actually, on the contrary, it probably helped them.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I'll have to follow up and get you on the podcast in 12 months to see kind of how that plays out. Because I'm really fascinated by that in particular, because obviously advancements like that can radically shift industries.
Oh, yeah.
I even saw, arguments to invest in airlines, for example, because if, people weigh less, then the cost for the airline companies and fuel goes down and they can become more profitable. So it's just going to be really interesting how
Well, it's interesting
potentially
too.
that influences your industry and others.
Right. I mean, even recently, I know with the regulations too that have come out with peptides and things like that. So, I mean, we actually will probably see on our side, I assume soon, a rise in certain products just
Mm.
because certain peptides are not available. So they're going to be looking for an alternative for that. So I'm interested to kind of actually see where that goes, because that was just within the last few weeks. So,
Yeah, for sure. One thing that I think you glossed over, and I actually had a client conversation today, is the brands that have done well over this kind of period and continue to grow and are the ones that are private labeled. And, kind of example that I had today with a client was they've ranked well for a lot of non-private label products. So people searching online, they were on the first page of Google for a lot of those products. And what happened is we were kind of taking a look a little bit under the hood with analytics because some sales were soft on those products. And what we
mhm.
found is that their ranking and like their position on Google did not change year over year. In fact, it actually improved. But the search demand for those individual products or some of those brands was significantly lower than same time last year. And so because they hadn't prioritized kind of the private label side of their business, and they just thought that they were going to continue to see this demand and see these orders for these specific products, they were kind of asleep at the wheel a little bit. And now the kind of conversation shifted to prioritizing their private label because they realized how much some of those other brands and just selling other brands in general is out of their control, right? They
Mhm.
don't control if, Orthos Marketing or Metagenics or all these other brands, how much they decide to push a product. And if you rank really well for a product and there's combined with a bunch of marketing by that company, that might be really profitable for you. But if it's
Right.
not, or if it changes, you're going to wish that you had built up that kind of private label side of your business a little bit more. So thought that
Yeah.
was interesting. Kind of, again, I'm all for private label. So I think you're
Well, it's
preaching to
like
the choir,
private
guy.
labeling. The other piece of that too is like, what's your story, right? So I always encourage people, when you're deciding to private label, like, why did you get into this industry? Like, where
Mm.
does your passion come from? What are some of your pain points? Like, marketing those. I mean, some of the most successful people I have, it's because they're known as like the SOT guy. He's the only one in the area that does SOT, and he markets, that like crazy. You have the line person. Those like practitioners have perfected, to me, marketing, because they are the go-to in this community. So it's like, how do you discover what you do best and private label, but private label like around that theme is kind of like the key to that, I think, too.
Yeah. I think Gary Vee made a video the other day talking about how, from a content perspective, you are unique, right? So trying to copy other
Right.
people's content or make generic content like will not stand out. But if you really lean into like your story, your reason why, your expertise, you can really start to build like you are your own brand, right? You become that
Mhm.
unique story online that no one can match because again, no one is you. But the second that you try to just kind of copy other people, it'll just look like a worse version of that. So
It just
I
doesn't
think
look
that's really good
sincere.
advice.
Yeah.
So then when you talk about, private label and account, going down that path, do you almost push people away from private labeling right off the bat and like let's build some foundations and like stick to your niche kind of first and then maybe look at private labeling?
I do. So normally I have people that, like, actually, I think probably 2 weeks ago, it was a new customer. They had no history of sales. They were somewhat of a brand and they wanted to private label. And I said, I thought that was a horrible idea. I was like, because what I don't want is you to get, 360 bottles, or whatever in
Yeah.
office, and for it to just sit there. That's not only going to be a nightmare for you, it's going to be a nightmare for me. Like,
Mm.
so you want to organically grow your business. And I always tell them, like, hey, I'm going to check back in with you in 6 months. Your sales should be here. In the next 6 months, it should be here. Like, we're going to work towards a goal. If you really are that gung-ho about private labeling, you will be that committed to growing your supplement sales to actually do it when it makes sense for your business. I mean, I've been doing this 12 years. I've had people, when I started, I encouraged people to private label that shouldn't have, and I've seen all of those kind of flop. And so with experience, I've realized like there is absolutely a threshold that somebody should actually meet, because that threshold also lets you know that they're invested in their business.
Mm.
So
Yeah, a lot of my reps hate me, I swear, because every
well,
time they push a product, they're like, "You should buy 12," and I'm like, "I'll take 3." And the whole reason I do that is so that way, one, I have time to learn about the product and I can explain it to a patient a few times.
right.
I can get those reps in, and then I can also kind of watch on how the product works within those patients. Now, I'm not expecting every patient, when I start them on a new product to like be like fireworks, but at the same time, it gives me those reps. And so, at least in my private label experience, I do that, and I might do another reorder of 3, and then all of a sudden, now I've got the flow of things, and then I'll be like, "Yep, this product's great. I'm going to private label it." And I think there's kind of levels of going from, "Hey, I'm going to start doing this," to, "Okay, now I'm ready because I've done the reps. I've spent the time underneath the bar to explain it, so that way I can give that value to the patient." I think that's a really crucial piece to it, because if you just start off the block, people are going to be like, "Well, tell me about your essential mag," and you're like, "Well, it's great. It's a good magnesium, but why?"
Why? Yeah, I know. And I feel like for you as a business owner, you also want to be comfortable and be in a place where like you want the private label in there. It's easy for you to recommend products. You know that, I mean, it works. Like there are certain levels of investment I think that you have to come across sincerely to a patient when you're
Right.
also suggesting something, right? So
100%. One thing
So
oh, go
go
ahead,
ahead, Logan.
Chris. I was gonna say one thing I'm really interested in. So I know you had a larger territory, and then obviously because you crushed it, they kind of brought you down into a smaller area. But when you were in, a larger territory and you had some rural areas where you had maybe like one provider, one pharmacy, and then you've got your dense population areas. How did you kind of help those, rural areas kind of really figure out how to grow? Because I think a lot of their issues is they have that scarcity mindset. I only have 1,000 people who live in my town. How would you kind of explain that kind of worry away?
So the first thing that I would always do is connect them with a like-minded pharmacist that is in a similar situation that has been successful. I've had businesses and pharmacies that were in like crazy, crazy areas that I couldn't even believe they were as successful as they were. And so the first thing that I do is like, hey, I'm going to connect you with so-and-so. You need to go shadow their pharmacy. You need to sit down and pick their brain on how to do it because it is possible. As far as supplements to go in there, I think the unique avenue that you have to have with that from a business perspective is also figuring out certain SKUs that are commodity products that are going to move because they're foundational nutrition, and then also having flexibility even within that to make it the most affordable for their patients. So unique ways of taking vitamin D or probiotics or things like that you could kind of stretch out the cost. But I would definitely say it's connecting them with somebody, which is why these forums to me are like so powerful, because I can tell people a lot of things, but I'm not smart enough to be a provider. But I know a lot of smart people, and I'm like, hey, listen, you need to get connected with somebody, because it also holds you accountable as a business owner. It's motivation for you to do something. Those are things naturally people are competitive. So I think it kind of gives you that edge to be able to do that. But I would just say the first thing I would do would be to connect them with somebody.
Yeah.
Smart.
Well, I think, your events do probably a couple things, which is, to your point, you're not the messenger, but it doesn't mean your message is wrong. So what's great about these events is you get people to say the things that you've been trying to like get through to people. But when they hear it from a peer or someone else in their same
Right.
profession, right, then it lands a little bit different. you obviously, get people together for the accountability aspect, which I think is huge because, just in our experience, I've noticed when other people find out how well someone else is doing, like it might completely shift their mindset in the sense of what they thought was possible, but also really kind of light a fire under them of like, if you view yourself as equal and or better than that individual, that can be really like frustrating and obviously be fuel to drive a change if again you feel like you can or have the ability to sell just as much if not more, and that doesn't
Absolutely.
happen unless those conversations happen. So I think your event obviously is helpful in a number of different ways just by getting people in the room.
Yeah, no, 100%.
So I'll kind of wrap with, I was going to ask you around, product categories or products in general that you feel like just are staples. But it sounds like you would really take every account as like, what are the type of patients that you see? What are the type of prescriptions that you fill? And then like just really kind of niche down. Is that kind of how you'd start people?
Yeah, it's funny. So if anybody has ever rode with me where I saw like an initial customer, that entire meeting, I'm not even trying to sell anything. I am literally spending an hour asking probably every annoying question that you could think of because their unique set of supplements can be completely different. I would say at the core of everything, your probiotics, your fish oil, your vitamin D, your magnesium, those foundational things are going to be consistent everywhere. But outside of that, that is really going to be unique to where their passion is, where they're investing the most in their business. So, I mean, those you uncover obviously by making sure that you're going in and finding those unique, spots of their business and what they're doing. But yeah.
Okay. Well, okay, I got two final questions. So one is, what kind of relationship do you see between your top accounts and the number of products that they carry? Because I've definitely heard on our end, like, oh, I just need more products. I need to expand my line. And they just automatically assume that if they expand their line, that will also lead to more sales. Like, are there some examples or in your experience where, I mean, people have a pretty small line, but they just sell a ton out of 10, 12 products and they don't have everything private labeled?
Yeah, so that's not my experience, but that's not
Okay.
to say that that probably doesn't exist. So at Ortho, our top 20 products, if I like that we sell, and probably where, 80% of our business comes as a company with some of those foundational products, all of my top accounts probably carry, I would say, 18 to 20 of those products. So
But do they
that's,
carry your entire line too?
they
Or,
do. They
okay,
do,
okay.
but I'll always I always find it interesting because at the end of every year I do an 80/20 report where I look at
Hmm.
where 80% of my business lies and then I'll pick apart some years, whether it's 20, 40, 60 accounts that's on there, but I'll in depth in January 1st look at everything and it's interesting to me because all of my top accounts they move a lot of our products, they'll carry 50% plus of our catalog, but the key is that they're always carrying those big volume products and they're doing that business with me.
Hmm. Okay. My final question then, Logan, if you got any, floor is yours. But my final question would be, um, if someone isn't going to start with private label, and I'm not arguing with that time or that kind of thought process, but if they're not going to private label right off the bat, how do you coach those businesses to effectively transition to private label and have those conversations with patients of like, I know you've seen this, but now it's going to look like this. Like, what have you seen has worked well so that, because I think that's a concern that I hear all the time of like, oh, I don't want to not private label right off the bat because if I don't, then there's going to be this friction in that transition. So how do we decrease that transition or that friction in your
I would
experience?
say the number one thing is people always are like, oh my gosh, this is going to be so much work. That's often why people don't want to do it because they have to name everything. It's kind of a big
Mm,
thing. So I'm like, keep it simple. You don't need a fancy name. Just call it probiotics. You know what I mean? So I think keeping it simple with that. As far as like the transition, obviously you hear people say like, hey, how do I change from selling orthobiotic to this? As far as that conversation goes, again, they have to have a cohesive marketing message with the office, but it is as simple as saying, I have done business with this company for 5, 10 plus years. With how convoluted the market is now with supplements, it is imperative that I make sure that you're getting efficacious products. And so I wanted to put my name and my stamp of approval on a product that I know you're going to see results with. They need some type of cohesive message that has to be repeated to patients. And to be honest, again, because I think people that are looking for experiences as patients, I honestly think sometimes, and no offense, Logan, I don't know what that transition was like to you, but sometimes I think a lot of that is just being scared and having apprehension. Like, you have to remind people there are people around you that have private labeled that are super successful with it. I think it's just a hurdle internally that you kind of have to get over.
Yeah.
I agree. That what you were saying about, transitioning, that's exactly what we did. We took our bottles and we're like, hey, we liked this product so much. We believed in the product. It's helped so many of our patients. We just wanted to put our own name on it. And that's the marketing that we ran for our transition with orthos stuff. And now people are like, oh, the reacted mag we call essential mag. And we're like, oh, where's the essential mag now? So it's been a very easy switch because they know they're getting that same great product.
Right.
And that's really, really crucial too. And I think that was a great point.
All right, last question, because I got to ask it, and I can't believe I didn't already. And this isn't a shot at either one of you and your profession, so I want to make that clear.
Oh, no.
But no. But so, and this is again just a Chris thing, so I could be completely wrong. But I would probably make the argument that some form of supplement is like the placebo effect, right? And there's lots of studies and examples of like taking, or like a leaf telling someone that like, hey, it's poison ivy, it's not poison ivy, and then poison ivy shows up. Like there's examples of that, right? And here's where I'm going with it, not saying that the products don't work. My point is,
Well, you're going to have to clarify yourself, Chris. You're leaving.
No. Yeah. If ever, yeah, maybe we'll cut this out of the podcast. No, I'm kidding. But the point I'm trying to make is, do you see people when these businesses, when they private label, their sales increase in that transition because their patients are more willing to buy, or there's more buy-in because now the business's brand is on it? I've heard from clients that the second they put their name on a product, like people that would look past the other brands, like, et cetera, and just not look at the product, the second they saw that recognizable pharmacy name or that recognizable clinic name on it, like now they turn their eyes towards it and we're more willing to not just buy it, but also take it consistently. And so again, that's where I was going with the whole thing. But do you see that buying, that uptick in sales? Do you get that feedback ever from the new accounts that start to private label, that just the patient buying goes up and the results go up in that process? Because if they take it more consistently and the product is good, they will get those results. But if they don't take it consistently, obviously no product, will help them.
Absolutely. And I think part of it is too, I don't think accounts obviously private label as a scare tactic, but I do think as a patient, when you see that a business is putting their stamp of approval on it, it's kind of saying like, hey, this is approved and this is not. So I do think as a patient, you're kind of like, oh my gosh, like there's a reason why they've made a drastic step to put their name on this. I probably should be taking this. But you absolutely see a rise in sales when people private label. Obviously, if it's coupled with marketing and stuff like that as well, you see it move even quicker. But even if somebody's not necessarily, huge on e-commerce or doing stuff like that, you'll still see a rise in sales, even if it's just an office sales. Okay. I don't know what you think, Logan, but that's what I see on my end, at least.
Yeah,
I'd agree with that. I would agree with that.
Cool. All right. Well, I could sit here for hours and take more of your time, but Tony informed me that she's got a bedtime, so I want to make sure I'm, respectful of that. Tony, I guess lastly, if you're in Indianapolis, it's pretty clear Tony would be the person to talk to. But for someone who's not in Indianapolis, I think you do a great job of sharing content on social media that could be helpful to businesses and or to other reps. So how would people find you? How would people connect with you if they're not maybe right in the Indianapolis or Indiana, kind of region?
Yeah, I would say, honestly, I'm probably most active on my Instagram page. So the Indianapolis Integrative Forum is a great way to just message me and chat. Obviously, there's amazing reps all over the country, which if you wanted to reach out to me, you could contact. I'm open. I mean, I talk to a lot of people in other regions via phone and telephone. I don't know how you link things on here, but obviously you have an assigned rep, but if people are ever just wanting to bounce ideas off of me, I mean, I would say the forum's probably the best way to contact me.
Okay, cool. Well, again, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Tons of really good things. I'm going to rewatch this and take some notes and some good reminders. I think you and Thomas brought different perspectives as an ortho rep, but I think there were so many nuggets between the two episodes. So again, thank you for coming on and making this work in your schedule.
Thanks for having me.